Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a bonus episode of Booking the Territory, the Unprofessional Wrestling Podcast. Where today, I'm talking to Ricky Cobb, the man behind @Super70Sport on Twitter, an account that I've been following for some time, and I thoroughly enjoy it because I'll get into it later on. But Ricky, let me welcome you into Booking the Territory for the first time. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for your time. How are you today?
Mike, I'm wiping my boots on the apron before I step through the ropes into this hallowed territory, man. I'm thrilled to be on the podcast, and I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. I have a question because I know you've done, I think you even at one point had your own podcast. I think you've also done numerous others. Have you done any wrestling ones?
I haven't, and it's a shame that hasn't happened because probably pro wrestling, if we're going to put it alongside, baseball and football and basketball and all of the pro sports, wrestling is really my greatest love. So, you're scratching an itch for me today, getting to do this. I might have to start getting some wrestlers to come on and let me interview them because, it's been such a huge part of my life.
I find that so crazy because, again, I've been following your Twitter for some time, and, I've watched it grow. I've seen all the great tweets. I've seen all the great sports tweets. I'm going to talk about a few of them, later on in the show, but I've noticed quite a few, not a ton, but I've seen the ones with my favorite is actually Dusty Rhodes and Magnum with the fur coats, and you captioned that one greatly with something like, "Please don't tell me pro wrestling has improved since this. You can shut your filthy whore mouth," or something like that. You've had some great tweets, wrestling tweets though, so it is amazing to me that of all I've seen these wrestling tweets. I'm like, this guy's got to like pro wrestling, and that's when I reached out to you. I said, I'm going to email him. And I haven't said anything to anyone other than my co-host, Doc, and Harper. I haven't said anything. I said, I got to reach out to him. And I saw your email. I said, let me email him. And, hey, what do I know? And you were telling me right before you started, or I hit the red light and started recording, that you actually grew up on Memphis wrestling. So tell me about that. I'm definitely all ears now.
Well, I grew up on Memphis wrestling, which means my standards are a little higher. That was my thing. Lance Russell and Dave Brown right along ringside, watching that on Channel 3 out of Louisville. We called it Channel 3 wrestling. My friends and I, and Jerry the King Lawler, Jimmy Hart, and all the names, Bobby Eaton, Austin Idol, Handsome Jimmy, and all those guys that made that territory so special, and certainly then in the afternoons on the weekend, you had to tune in Gordon Soley and Georgia Championship Wrestling, so Saturdays were a big deal when I was a kid, and a big part of that was Jerry Lawler at about noon. And then the Nature Boy at about 6:05 or whenever that one started, that was the big day of the week.
That's amazing that you, again, I should have known, when I first started seeing your tweets, because obviously I saw the sports ones first, that I was like, this guy's probably a pro wrestling fan. And I've joked with friends of mine, folks that are our age, and you and I are within about 4 years in age, and my co-host Doc, same, and Harper the same. We're all like around the same age, and we all have these things with sports back in the day, and then we all have this thing with wrestling now. Many of us grew up on different territories, like you grew up on Memphis. I grew up on Mid-South in Louisiana. My co-host Doc, he grew up on World Class because he grew up in Dallas, Texas. But it's just, it's funny how we all had this love for all these sports, but we also all had this love for wrestling, and we'd watch it on the weekends. And it's just amazing how it's so much different now. Kids aren't the same now to me, but I'm just amazed. I was like, wow, this guy really has a love for wrestling. And as I say that, you talk about Memphis, you and I were exchanging emails before we started, and you told me a Cornette story. Do you mind sharing that on air, or I can share the one that I was going to tell you that I didn't email you?
Well, I'll tell you mine first, and then I'm dying to hear yours. I mean, yeah, Jim Cornette's he's my favorite. You know, I'm a Jim Cornette guy, and I'm addicted to his podcast. And I met Jim in Horse Cave, Kentucky, which is where I'm from, and it would have had to have been, I guess, 1983. I was probably 11 years old or something like that, and I asked Corny for an autograph, and he signed it for me. And looking back on it now, I mean, Corny wasn't that much older than me. I know, I think it was probably his first year, of being an on air talent, and I had that autograph, for many, many years. And, as these things go, it got lost somewhere along the way. And years later, I had a chance to talk to him at a Ring of Honor show, and I told him that story. And, he signed an 8x10 for me, and, my money was no good to him. He wouldn't let me pay him for it. And, just a hell of a nice guy. I mean, I think that's the thing. He's he's a controversial guy, with a lot of people, and there's a lot of folks that think negative things about Jim Cornette. But what I know, and what I think even better than I, from your relationship with him, is that he's truly one of the great guys in wrestling, just as a person.
Yeah, I think, because Corny's so controversial, and I totally agree with you. He's so controversial, and I've got friends that don't like him. They hate his takes on many, many things. That's all I'll say. And since this is a wrestling podcast, I'll stick to wrestling when I say that. They can't stand some of his modern wrestling takes. And, I just say this, and this will go along with the story I tell you. So the first time I actually met Jim Cornette in the Dallas area, back in, I think it was WrestleMania weekend 2016, he was making an appearance at an independent show that had kicked off the weekend, and I think it was on a Thursday night. So Cornette's like the attraction there, right, Ricky? I mean, there's other names there, but he's the main guy. And he's at his table. He's got his two lockers of stuff. He's setting up, because I'm in there before, like all the fans are there and stuff. And I was introduced to him right there. We talked for a little while, and he said, "Hey, yeah, I'll come on your show." He was committed to doing it at that time. Well, I watch him pull out all his stuff out of these old lockers. I call them, they're like suitcase lockers. You know what I'm talking about? The black ones, and they got the buckle, and you can lock them. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh
those
yeah.
old school ones from back in the day. You probably had one in your room. I know I did.
That's right. Old school. That's right.
Yeah. So he gets everything set out. And, I mean, he's got so much stuff. He's got 3-4 tables around him and a U. And then the fans were let in, and I'm looking at the line to his table, and I'm going, there's no way he's going to talk to all these people before the show starts. There's no way. And I watched Cornette take time with every single fan, whether they spent money or not, talk to him as long as they wanted to talk to him. And he had a long line, signing things. There were people who just, "Hey, I bought this item. Can you sign it for me?" He wasn't even charging them. He would just sign, if they brought a bat or a picture that they had. Now, if they wanted one of his pictures and sign it, yeah, he would charge them because it was his picture he was given to him. But other than that, if it was something that they brought, no, he was cutting free. I mean, now they're cameos basically, but back then there wasn't cameo. He was cutting videos for fans that had their cell phones on Russo. It was comical to watch him just work. But I watched him. He would not, even when the show started, he stood there and he's like, "These people have waited for me. I'm going to make sure I sign everything. I'm going to make sure I greet them all. And I'm not just going to walk away and say, 'Oh, I'm sorry you missed me.'" Because it wasn't his fault that, the line was that long. So that's the story I was going to tell you, kind of related to, the story you had about, hey, he didn't even charge you. He just signed it, and that was that. But I just saw a different side of him as as a personality, as someone who is ultimately a huge fan. I mean, that's the thing about him. And then my personal interactions with him, he's invited me on his show 4 different times. He's always treated me well. He's super duper nice. He's got these controversial opinions, and some people don't like the way he goes about vocalizing them. but I feel as a human being, he's a good person, and that's why, and I've gotten to know him, so that's the part of it where I'm like, look, sometimes when you don't know someone, you really don't know them, so you're only judging them by what you kind of hear and see. For me, though, always been great to me, and again, I watched him with those fans that day, and took all the time in the world, and I was like, oh, he's a stand-up guy, man, because I've seen plenty of guys in wrestling business that are like, too bad for you. Sorry that the line was long. I gotta leave now, and that didn't happen with him.
Yeah.
So it was cool.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not surprised at all to hear that. I'm really not. And I think you said it. He's a fan, and his passion for this, he loves. Find somebody. You know how they'll say with relationships. Find somebody who looks at you like, this person looks at that thing. I think find somebody who loves you as much as Jim Cornette loves professional wrestling. I mean, it's in his blood, and
Yeah.
and he's a good Kentucky boy, like myself. So, maybe that's part of it. I think, Mama Cornette raised him right.
Yeah, he's that's the one thing about him. What I like is he took such detailed notes, and that's the one thing about his show when he's talking about classic wrestling. He's got these details, so he can quote things. I mean, it's not just yeah, I think this is what happened. Like he took meticulous notes, and so he's got all these notes he can reference back to, and I thought that was really cool. I think that's one of the main things that I enjoy about when he talks about classic wrestling and whatnot. Hey, so I going back to your Twitter, I've read that you started it back in December 2013, but that you really dedicated yourself to it sometime around 2015, and then that's where it started to really take off. Can you talk about that a little bit? Just as we talk about the account and your love for wrestling and sports as well.
Sure. I created the account. I'm a college professor by day, and I created the account. I think I was on the holiday break of that, December 2013 that you were referring to. And I was a fan of a book written by a guy named Dan Epstein about baseball called Big Hair and Plastic Grass. And it was about baseball in the 1970s. And Dan is such a gifted writer, and I loved the book. And he had created a Facebook page to promote the book, where on a daily basis he was posting old baseball cards and giving birthday shout outs and things like that to these ball players from the 70s. And I found myself really looking forward to it. I didn't even know why it was resonating with me so much, but I had to check Facebook every day just to see, who has Dan, put up today? Is it Willie Stargell? Is it Reggie Jackson? Is it, some other random player that I maybe hadn't thought of in a long time? And it became something that I really looked forward to a lot. And I thought, well, what if I could kind of take the vibe that Dan is going for with this Facebook page and just talk about all sports? Let's bring basketball and football and boxing and bowling and just whatever was worth talking about, expand it a little bit and kind of celebrate the entire sports landscape of that era. And I've always had an affinity for the 70s, as you might imagine. And what I came to find is I started to do this on a regular basis, which your homework is impeccable because everything you said is right. I really began in earnest at the beginning of 2015, doing it on a daily basis and really being committed to it. And what I found pretty early on is, there's other things that I wanted to talk about besides just sports. And so things started to creep in there about pop culture, the toys that we played with, the bikes that we rode, the dangerous playground equipment that we, somehow survived to tell the tale, and, the hair and the clothes, and everybody was smoking, and those 7,000 pound tube TVs that everybody had in their living room with no remote, and the shag carpet that you could practically you'd lose things in it. It was like hitting a golf ball into the rough, just going through your living room. And I realized, boy, that stuff is just as fun, if not more fun, to talk about than the sports itself. And so I started to float a few of those kinds of tweets out there just to see how people would take it. And they really responded. And, pretty soon I started realizing that, even though the 70s technically ended on December 31st, 79, a lot of the aesthetic of the 70s and the attitudes and a lot of the ridiculous things, kind of as we look back on it now, that continued into the 80s as well. So I started breaking all my rules, basically, is what happened. I started tweeting about non-sport stuff. I didn't confine myself strictly to the 70s anymore. And much to my surprise, I started to develop a following. I hit 1,000 followers, 2,000, 3,000. I was in the Taco Bell drive-through the night that I hit 3,000. And I remember just being beside myself with excitement that I had 3,000 followers. That was probably the spring of 2015. And, then I started to see names that I recognized, commenting on tweets, liking tweets, following me, real celebrities, both from entertainment as well as sports. And I realized that it was kind of creeping out of just my little circle. I thought that there might be a little niche audience of a few thousand people that, might share my sensibilities. And, what I came to realize is that a lot of the things that I was talking about and tweeting about really spoke to our entire generation. And by the end of 2015, much again to my surprise, Sports Illustrated named me to their Twitter 100 list. It was just kind of one of those, kind of garbage year-end online list. It's you don't get a trophy or anything, but it was still very surprising for me just to be recognized. I remember some of the other accounts were like Kobe Bryant's account and like real legitimate names, and then there's Ricky Cobb somehow poking his head into the list, and it was pretty heady stuff. So, I kind of knew by that point that I had something special going. Didn't know exactly, how to harness it or what to expect. But, here we are, some 5 or 6 years later, and, I've crossed 500,000 followers, and, just could not possibly be happier about this unexpected midlife adventure of mine.
It really is amazing that and I noticed that recently that you were at a 500,000, and I'm it's amazing, man. Doc and I were talking about your Twitter. My co-hosts were talking about your Twitter about a week ago, and he sent me a text and he said, "This account is my entire childhood." Basically he wrapped it up in one, and what he meant was from the sports to the cultural stuff that you post in there to the wrestling. He's like and so then he starts. I think he's been following it for some time, but he finally started really paying more attention because I kept bringing it up to him. And then he started scrolling your Twitter feed. He's just finding everything. And then he's sending me screenshots. And I'm like, I've seen that one already. So it's amazing. And obviously, the wrestling ones are the ones that come to our mind too, along with the sports as well. But yeah, it's really incredible what you've done with it. I want to mention one more thing before I go back to some more wrestling talk. I have to give you credit because the amount of retweets and likes that your Howard Cosell and OJ Simpson and Bruce Jenner tweet got is simply amazing when you caption it with Howard Cosell saying, "I've looked into the future and you're not going to believe what I have to tell you," as he stares into the camera with OJ and Bruce Jenner. Um, I can imagine it got some crazy responses, but that is phenomenal. And your wit in your captions, to me, it reminds me of BTT because myself and Hardbody Hopper and Doc, we're kind of the same way on our show, not through Twitter. We do the same thing and we talk about some of the same stuff, but the captions and the one line stuff, that's what sets it off. Like that's what really puts it to it. Because anyone can tweet the picture, but I think you've got a really good imagination, whether it's wrestling or sports or pop culture during that era, of captioning these things to make them come to life because that's what you're doing. It's not a real caption, but it's a lighthearted, funny joke. It captures the time period. It's not politically correct, which I love because that's how BTT is. I don't think you go far. I think you don't go far enough sometimes, but it's really hilarious, like the captions you put on these things.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. Thank you. I mean, it's a passion, you know. I mean, I think my entire life I've, taken joy in trying to make people laugh, and I've always had a passion for comedy. That's not the direction that I went vocationally, but I'm sure, if there is a parallel universe, there probably are many of them. There probably are a few where, I graduated from high school and just started trying to do comedy. But in this timeline that we're on, it was something that, I just didn't follow on a professional level. I was, I think my friends thought I was funny, but, we all crack each other up, when we're buddies together and whatever. So I never really looked at it as, something that I could take and turn into a thing. But again, it's funny how things work out. My captions and sort of my comedic sensibilities seem to have really registered with a lot of people. And, again, I think it was like a 1 in a million shot, when I started this Twitter account that it would, build to what it's become. And, I can certainly tell you that my appreciation for it has only gotten bigger over time because, I just feel so lucky to have the opportunity to make so many people laugh and to have made so many friends and to have met so many people that, I'm a fan of, and to have, gotten to know and become friends with many of them. It's just sort of like this Willy Wonka, adventure that I'm on. And, I was telling my girlfriend the other day, sometimes I feel like I'm going to wake up and I'm going to say, oh my, goddamn, that was the weirdest, fucking dream I have ever had. You're not going to believe this, because the whole narrative of how this went down, is pretty out there.
Yeah, it's crazy. I wanted to mention so when I talk about let's go back to wrestling because I did want to ask you some questions. I know you say Cornette, it's like your all time favorite. I look at Corny's a manager. Obviously, he mostly managed. I mean, he's had a couple of matches, but it's more of a joke type thing. But who was your favorite wrestler if you had one, or favorite wrestlers if it's if it's more than one, growing up?
Oh,
In the whether it's the late '70s, early '80s, or even beyond. Because I'm not sure when you stop watching, but I'm sure you don't watch whatever they put out there nowadays. But yeah, who were your favorites?
yeah, I mean, I have, followed AEW pretty
Oh, okay,
closely. That, yeah, AEW brought me back in because I wanted to see how they were going to approach it. And initially, Cody Rhodes was talking about it being more of a sport, and Tony Khan too, for that matter, we're talking about it being more of a realism,
right.
sports based concept with the putting the records on the screen and whatnot. And I don't think that they really held so true to that, but it has been interesting to see AEW, try to get a foothold in the industry and position themselves as a major player, giving the WWE some type of some type of something to be concerned about. Although I don't know how concerned about it Vince is, with all the contracts that he's letting lapse. But to get back to your question, Corny was my guy, right? And of course, a manager and Bobby Heenan in much the same way. I think maybe I identified with the managers because even at that age, I knew that I probably wasn't going to have the physical tools to be a wrestler. So I identified with the managers. I thought, yeah, maybe I could get on TV and talk some shit. I might be able to do that. And so I love those guys. But as far as wrestlers, my favorite wrestler, my first favorite wrestler, if I'm going to answer the question thoroughly, was Jerry the King Lawler. Again, going back to Memphis.
Yeah.
So I grew up, a Jerry Lawler guy, and that was a big deal. I saw Jerry Lawler wrestle in Greensburg, Kentucky. I saw him wrestle Handsome Jimmy Valiant, and that was a huge deal to me. Greene County High School. Jerry didn't do a lot of those little high school shows, but maybe business was down. I don't know. There's Jerry. Maybe Jarrett said, we need you to go to Greensburg, but I saw him there, and then later on, my favorite wrestler, hands down, became Ric Flair. But other names, certainly Dusty Rhodes, Roddy Piper, Randy Savage. If I was putting together, probably my all-time, personal Mount Rushmore of guys that I have enjoyed, it would probably go Flair, Rhodes, Piper, Macho Man.
I mean, it's all subjective, but there's definitely nothing wrong with that list for sure. I mean, my co-host Doc, Ric Flair has always been his favorite. He's a Ric Flair fan through and through. And I mean, I'm Flair's not my favorite, but he's on my Mount Rushmore. If I had to pick four, he's definitely right up there. He's from the promos to the wrestling. I don't know how anybody can watch those mid '80s TBS shows and not look at him and go, that guy is phenomenal. And I think back to that whenever I think of Flair, amongst many things with him. It's not just the promos, it's the old saying, he can have a good match with a broomstick. I mean, it's very much true. But he's phenomenal. So
Yeah,
I love that
as a,
stuff.
yeah, as an entire package, from the charisma, the mic skills. Obviously, he could go against anybody. I know there's the criticism that some of his matches, they got a little too much, in that Ric Flair pattern. You're gonna, we've all seen him get caught on that turnbuckle
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
slammed. It never worked out for him. He didn't get a lot of submissions with that figure four either, against big names. But
Right.
for me, as an in ring worker. I'm probably drawn more towards Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart as being I think Michaels is probably the best worker I've ever seen, but and Bret Hart in terms of telling the psychology and telling the story and his matches, maybe having a little more variability than a Flair, but when you combine the charisma and the mic skills with it, I still consider the Nature Boy to be the gold standard.
He's phenomenal, and I'm right there with you. I wasn't the biggest. I think Shawn Michaels is great, but I was I'd probably put Bret Hart on my Rushmore. Although every time I list it out, I'm like, wow, you got to eliminate so many people just to get the four. That's where the struggle comes in. But one of my favorite tweets from you, as we're talking about Flair, I want to make sure I mention this one is the Flair tweet where it's Flair. He's got canary yellow pants on. He's got the silk shirt with the big collar chain. I think he's got a chain around his neck. And the caption, I took it in my notes. It says, "I believe this is Ric Flair's yearbook photo from when the seniors voted him most likely to style and profile." It's a tremendous photo of Flair. The pants and the shirt just set it off. So Yeah, man. I like when you post those Flair ones, and you've got one with Flair and Piper too. But I have to agree to go back to what you said from a charisma standpoint, the mic skills in ring, and I agree. You get to a point in Flair's career where it's like, man, he kept doing the same thing in the ring, but he was so damn good. It was hard not to like it at that point. You're 20 years in, so obviously you're gonna 30 years in, you're gonna see some repeats. I guess is what I'm looking for at certain points. But um, I think you have a solid four, the four you picked. I've got no gripe, and you're definitely a connoisseur of wrestling. So there's that.
Well, I've logged the hours watching it. Certainly, I mean, I'm like every other fan, man. I've got an opinion, and it's worth whatever you want to make of it. But you're really right about that. I mean, it's so subjective, and to narrow it down to four, I mean, I think for any of us that are, you know, serious wrestling fans, there's there's probably 50 guys that you could make a really good argument for as being worthy of being on that Mount Rushmore. So, it's a very personal kind of question.
Yeah, it is, and it's always the thing where you're gonna have to eliminate someone that that easily could be in that Rushmore. So it's very, because I mean, I'll agree with you. I definitely got to put Flair in there. But then when you start listing out the great talents of the '80s, just the '80s. I mean, you could just take one decade. You'll get to a point where it's like, wait, I don't know if I have. I got to remove this person to put this one here. And then it gets into don't even do this to yourself. Don't start ranking them like 1 through 5, because then if you put somebody at
Oh,
5, that should. We used to do top fives on our show years ago, where we top 5 mic skills of all time, top 5 heels of all time, and it got to the point where it's like I'm getting tweets and emails. How can you say this person is 4? They should be 2, and I'm going, yeah, but then if I'd have put the person that's 2 number 4, that somebody else would have said, yeah, that wouldn't work for me either. So it's subjective, but I guess that goes back. The point of it all is, wow, wrestling was so great back then. You literally could have more than 4 people on a Rushmore, or more than, to do a top 5 is very hard. And it's all subjective, but hey, that's what made it so great back in the day.
it was really, you're always going to be partial probably to the era that you grew up in. I think in some respects, um, I look back on other sports in much the same way. I 80s baseball and 70s baseball and 70s and 80s NFL. There's always a part of me that is going to think that that's just kind of how it should be. And I think that's true with wrestling as well. But wrestling has got a whole other dynamic because of the nature of the business itself, and Vince McMahon certainly gobbling up talent, and basically effectively for the most part putting a pretty definitive end on the territories, and then the internet, and everybody becoming a smark,
Yeah.
change the game as well. So it's been interesting and sometimes disappointing to see how the industry has adapted to being in this social media information overload, where you know some of the mystery of the business, a lot of the mystery of the business, as has been lost, and it's really just due to circumstances.
Yeah, if I can't remember where I first heard this, but if cable television wasn't going to destroy the territories as we knew them, like with you, you had Memphis, I had Mid South, with Cowboy Bill Watts, Doc had World Class. If cable television wasn't going to destroy the territories with Vince gobbling up all the talent, and basically, people eventually went out of business, um, it would have never survived the internet age, and definitely the age of social media, the territories that is. I mean, wrestling survives now, but it survives in a completely different way than it did during the time we're talking about, early 80s, late 70s, even mid 80s, where you started the territory started to just die off. They hadn't died off, obviously, but started to. So you definitely, at times were different. And you know, in a different way, it happens to all sports, or and because I considered wrestling a sport, I still kind of do. I mean, those guys, many of them are great athletes, but it kind of every sport changes and evolves. I mean, just look at. I'm a huge football fan. Some of your tweets I crack up at because you know you see quarterbacks in the '80s just getting destroyed, like I mean plowed through like with a bulldozer, and it's not even a foul. Nowadays, they cast somebody and shoot them into the sun for doing some of the things that these attempted
Yeah.
murders were almost on the football field back in the day. So, and I mention it like that to say, obviously football is different because it's not the entertainment that pro wrestling is, but everything evolves, and football learned more about concussions, and I don't know, sometimes they take it too far with things and penalties. I mean, that call on Brady this past weekend, where the guy literally was trying to not hit him and throw him to the ground, and they still called a foul or a penalty. It's so far from what you or I grew up with, and I say that because wrestling is kind of similar in that it's not the same, but it's not the same because you couldn't have it the same. Everybody became an expert. Everybody's got a podcast. I say that as a wrestling podcaster. So it changed. Cable television changed it. The internet changed it. Social media definitely changed it. But it still survived through and through. I'm not the biggest fan of the current product, although I pick and choose some of the things I watch. Like I've been keeping up with this FTR and Briscoes thing because I'm a big Briscoes fan. But everything definitely changes when it comes to, and we're gonna be you said it, Ricky. We're gonna be partial to the things that we grew up watching because no matter what, it could be the greatest thing known to man. Now we're gonna have that nostalgia feeling for that stuff we saw in the early '80s, and
That's that's
nothing
very
can take that
true.
away.
Nothing can take that away. And again, I'm gonna echo Cornette a little bit here and say that I just think there's if I had one complaint that I would lodge towards modern professional wrestling, and this isn't really geared toward any particular promotion because I think it's an issue in just about all of them, is just too much obvious cooperation in the ring. I'm an old school guy, so some of these spots where guys are you know obviously having to cooperate to a degree that just boggles the mind in order to pull off some aerial move tends to not set well with me. The old Cornette line about you want it to look like you're hurting each other without hurting each other, and it's kind of flipped. You have more obvious cooperation, and guys are attempting high risk moves that are not going to be beneficial to them having a long career in some cases.
Yeah, you said it a lot with that. It's some things are just way too choreographed. I mean, I hate sounding like Cornette with this too, but it's like a dance routine sometimes.
It really is, and I will say this: I've been holding on to this thought for a long time. My absolute, and he's probably a delightful man. Okay, I'm only commenting on the gimmick because he's probably a wonderful person. But Orange Cassidy, absolutely, I die on the inside every time I watch an Orange Cassidy match. If you're
I've I've never really talked about this on the show, but me too. I just can't. I cannot get into it. It's like, look, he might be a great fighter. Like he might legitimately be able to shoot and kick people's ass for real, but it's
there's
just
there's
stupid.
there's zero chance of that. Let's be
Okay,
honest.
but I'm with you. The gimmick is just like it's so dumb.
It's to me, and again, I say this, I just say this as a fan, somebody who's never worked in the wrestling industry, and I will leave the true expert opinions to the people who have done it. But to me, if your gimmick necessitates making highly trained professionals look like assholes to make you look good, get a better gimmick. I just I hate to see it. I mean, it's I can understand on the independent circuit where you want to come in, make an impression, sell some merchandise, but on a weekly basis, you know, hands in the pockets, running around, if any semblance of reality in wrestling, that guy would have gotten his ass handed to him about 1,000 times over. So, the fact that Tony Khan continues to, you know, push him to the degree that he does, is that's my 2022 wrestling pet peeve. If I had to pick one.
Yeah, if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, when I think when it was AEW first started, maybe, or maybe it was right after, one of the things that drove me up a wall, but besides Orange Cassidy, was Marco Stunt, because
Oh
to
God.
me, I equate that to now, Ricky. I'm a big New Orleans Saints fan. I grew up in New Orleans, so that's my team. Um, but I made an example of it, of what it reminded me of. So I used Tom Brady at the time. Though I said, Marco Stunt being in the ring to me would be like if the Patriots put a a 12-year-old kid at left tackle and told them to protect Brady's blind side. That's kind of what it was like to me. And I look, the guy might, I say kid because he's 20 years younger than me, obviously, or more. He might be a good human being, but I don't need to see a 5 foot nothing person in the ring with another full grown man. It just doesn't. There's nothing about that was appealing. So I agree
You're
with you, man. There's things like that.
Yeah,
I wanna. The thing about wrestling, Ricky, we know it's a work, right? We all know it's a work now. But as Doc and I and Harper and I always talk about on this show, at least make me think it's real. Like at least make me go, damn, I wonder if they really have some animosity with each other, because they're cutting those promos and they're getting pretty vicious with each other in the ring. Like I want to have that doubt in my mind. If you can't give
absolutely.
me that doubt, that's where I lose it. How do you feel about that?
I couldn't agree with you more. If I go see a magician, I don't want him to tell me how he does the tricks, and I don't want him to telegraph the tricks to such a degree that I can figure it out. Right? I know that he's not actually sawing the lady in half, but I want to be absorbed in the performance. And when people say, "Oh well," we all know it's work anyway, so what does it matter, boomer, or whatever, the arguments that you'll hear, my response to that would be, any scripted television show that you watch, particularly, anything that is a drama, that movie or that TV show is a work, but you don't want to constantly be reminded of that while you're watching it, right? Like if there's a microphone that pops down into the picture, it's going to take you completely out of the scene.
Right.
Or if something ridiculous happens that just isn't in place. If you're watching a dramatic scene in your favorite TV show and a clown, goes by in the background on a unicycle, juggling bowling pins, it's gonna take you right out of what you're
Yep.
watching. So, I respect professional wrestling as an art form. I think that done well, done properly, professional wrestling is truly a great art form. And I think that it should be treated with that kind of respect more than it is, both sometimes by the wrestlers themselves and definitely by the people that are booking it. And as far as
Yeah.
Marco Stunt goes, hey, again, um, he may be a good kid, but I'm a nice guy, and you don't want to watch me getting booked on AEW either. I mean, it doesn't work. And to have Kenny Omega, doing a spot where he's begging off of Marco Stunt. I mean, come on. You're talking about the guy at that time who was your world champion. And, I don't think there's anything funny or cute about it. I mean, for everybody, even on the territory level that has carried the strap around and, been the guy who is, drawing fans and, the face of the company. I think I think that you are tarnishing your own championship, and that's something that shouldn't ever happen in business where you actually get to book these things. And it's one thing if it's the NFL playoffs and the top team gets knocked out, and you end up having a couple of upstarts in the Super Bowl, and it's kind of like, oh, the ratings would have been better if Tom Brady had won, or whatever, but you don't get to control that in those sports. In wrestling, you actually get to eliminate a lot of the bullshit if you're smart. And I'll never understand that kind of booking. Why would you make your world champion look like a schmuck for dwarf Dongsucker?
Yeah, and again, that's why I made the comparison. It's like putting, a 12-year-old on at left tackle to protect Brady's blind side. You just wouldn't do it in a real sport. So just making a mockery, and that's what it is. It's like I think you nailed it. When you watch a serious television show, you're watching something on TV where it's a crime drama, and all of a sudden, that's the theme of it, 100% of the time, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's just some absurd stupidity that goes on. You'd literally call it out. You'd say, "What the hell was that?" I'm assault. I'm you. Some people would say they're offended. Some people would say this is dumb. Why would they even do that? That made no sense. Are they trying to insult me with stupidity? And that's kind of how I feel with some of that stuff. I've come around lately to AEW just with. I'm schizophrenic with it, meaning that I will fast forward through many things. I'll tape it, DVR it, because you don't tape things anymore, right? I did DVR it and fast forward to the things, and I'll watch the promos I want to watch, like MJM and MJF and CM Punk, and I've been dying and falling in love lately with the Briscoes and FTR on Twitter. They are great. I hope they bring that to the actual promotion. I'm sure they will, but we'll see. Haven't seen the latest episode, so as I say that, who knows what happened this week? But yeah, I'm with you, Ricky. You gotta. We know it's a work, but I want to believe. And one thing Doc always says when we would do the show for years, he'd say, "Man, back in the day, I can remember my grandmother," or he'd say a family member go, "You watch that wrestling?" The adults, that's fake, right? They would always say that. And
Mm-hmm.
then you'd see someone come out that would make that person stop and go, "Wait, I know this stuff is supposed to be fake, but that guy's real." That's the magic there. That's what I'm talking about when I say, I understand. I know it's a work, but when I look at a person and go, "Wait, is he really shooting? What's going on here, man?" That's the magic. I want you to put that doubt in my mind where I'm thinking about it, like, man, this guy means business. So,
You're
um,
you
yep,
couldn't possibly be more right. It's a big part of why Stone Cold Steve Austin got over. It's a big part of why Brock Lesnar is always going to be a guy that generates attention.
yep,
And who, if you look at AEW and ask yourself, um, obviously FTR, I love those guys. I mean, they're in the ring, impeccable, and obviously love and appreciate the business. And the Briscoe brothers are great as well. I actually met one of those guys one time, and but I'll say, who's the guy in AEW if you had to pick one that probably, and I'm talking about, in ring talent. Who's the guy that probably understands the business the best? And, I think it's CM Punk. And I don't think that it's an accident that, CM Punk is the most popular guy, going in that promotion. And, I hope that CM Punk rubs off, on the mentality of some other guys there. And I hope that he rubs off on Tony Khan as well, because I think if you had a guy like CM Punk, you know, pulling the levers for that entire promotion, I think you'd see viewership start to go up, which has been something of a problem. Tony keeps signing all this talent that is becoming available, but those numbers are holding pretty level. And at some point, if you really see yourself as a somebody who's going to step up and compete with the WWE, he's got to find a way to stop hovering just above and just below a million viewers a week, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, and it's hard nowadays because there's so many different forms of entertainment. There's so many different streaming services, and you just, I don't ever think it'll get back to the millions that watched, at one time. But you're right. You want to see at least some push upward from hovering at that same level. I mean, they look. I'll give them credit. They've gotten a bunch of better talent since they started, and I mean, look, Bryan Danielson, CM Punk. I think Jay Lethal's there, but I've been, I don't think he's been on television for a while, and I was a big fan of his in ROH. If the Briscoes come in, that would be great. So I mean, they've gotten to me better talent than what they had. Just a matter of capitalizing on it, and I think they can do more. But yeah, it's rough. I will. It is very hard nowadays for anyone, with a program on television because there's so many different options. I mean, there's so many streaming services. You don't, we used to be beholden. I mean, I grew up like you. We used to be beholden to what was on those channels. There was nothing else. There was no streaming platform for us to go watch anything. There, many people didn't even have VCRs where they could watch, things that they had taped. Now there's so much at your disposal with YouTube and the streaming platforms. I see why it can be hard to push through that number, but I agree. It'd be nice to see him do so because I don't know what WWE is doing. I haven't watched it in quite some time. And I've been down on AEW before. I've talked about here Marco Stunt and all that stuff, and I've just said that I couldn't do it at times. I push through. I want them to succeed. I think it's healthy for professional wrestling if there's multiple options. But I can see why it is hard for them to get past that certain threshold. It's not easy for sure.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it. It's going to be a challenge, but I do believe, again, coming back to what you were saying, if you get a little bit more of that, hey, wait a minute, is this, even if the people that are watching don't know the term, if they're thinking in their mind, is this a shoot?
Yeah.
Is this, hey, well, hey, wait a minute, this may not be a shoot, but there's something going on here. It's, that to me is the kind of thing that creates a buzz and, maybe brings in some of the people that, gave up on wrestling a long time ago because, you've kind of established, AEW has kind of established, they got about 1 million people that are going to tune in for the product that they're being given. But like you said, the talent on the roster is considerably better now than it was, early on in AEW, and the improvement to the roster has been a lot more substantial than and I'm sure the amount of the payroll, is probably quite a bit higher as well, and the viewership is, holding kind of flat. So, I think that, it would probably behoove Tony Khan to, maybe consider, approaching things in a little more of a reality based way and trying to generate some heat. I mean, I know real heat is kind of a thing of the past, but I do believe that there's a way to, kind of have a kayfabe light, for our era that at least brings back a little bit more of that. I don't really know what to think about this, but I definitely know I want to tune in and see what happens next.
You nailed it. It's hard to get, you can't get heat like you used to. And one of the things that we always talk about on this show when we're reviewing old wrestling is we said years ago when we were started reviewing the NWA Saturday Night Show from the 80s, the TBS show, we said, as we watch those shows, and you watch those shows and there's all these enhancement talent matches. I mean, it's not like we were watching 5-star classics back in the day on television. So we didn't realize this when we were kids, but as we were older watching it, we said, man, we don't know if we like the wrestling as much as we did the shit talking, because that's what made you actually want to see the match. It wasn't, oh, this guy looks good, I can't wait to see him wrestle. What it was you had Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes and Magnum TA, and in your case, Jerry Lawler, and you had these guys cut these promos, and they would talk a lot of shit, say a lot of stuff that's not politically correct nowadays, especially Ric Flair. Some of the stuff he would talk about, bringing the women back to the Marriott and plowing through a few, was just, you couldn't do that now. But they would say and do things that was like maximum shit talking, and they would insult their opponent. And then if you were the horseman, you jumped your opponent and you did things that got the baby faces. The fans wanted the baby faces to kick your ass now, and it was the shit talking that actually did it. And nowadays, to me, if you watch wrestling now, I'm not saying they don't do this. There are a lot of promos, but there's a lot more wrestling on the shows generally than there is promos. And again, I'm not advocating for an hour worth of promos on a show. That's not my point. My point is, if you go watch the old shows, there was a lot of shit talk from damn near everybody on the roster. Um,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
yeah,
And work rate, in my opinion, is overrated. I mean, I think there's too many guys who are, they've got to get their shit in, right?
yep,
And I don't dislike the Young Bucks, as much as corny, but the Young Bucks, so just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. And it seems like every match, they're chasing that 5-star rating, and I think that it's too much sometimes. It becomes like Dancing with the Stars, more than a wrestling match. And I think, again, guys are a little too clever for their own good sometimes. It's like they have the ego thing of trying to top one another and see who, Dave Meltzer is going to give more stars, in the next Observer, more so than realizing that, you don't have to go out there and, just perform one high spot after another. And sometimes, in many cases, it's a lot better off if you don't. And it means more, when you want to go to that next gear in a big moment. Fans are just overwhelmed. When every scene in the movie is an explosion and a car crash, they eventually, none of them matter anymore.
you nailed it. I mean, I can't say it any better than that. If you see it, if every single thing is and not the car crash, but a flip and dive. I mean, it flip
Mhm.
dive. You see that 100 times in a 2 hour show. It's not special anymore. So
I see.
there,
I see
yeah.
one. I see one more guy jump on a group of 7 dudes that have been standing there for 30 seconds waiting for him to get there. It just kills me. It's like, who's entertained by that? It's like there was a time there on AEW where, like, the Dark Order was, somebody was flipping off onto 6 of them, every freaking week. And it's like, at what point are these guys going to understand, maybe we shouldn't stand in a circle, 8 feet from the turnbuckle. We got some slow learners there.
No, you're right. It's yeah. Well, let's just stand here and wait for this guy to jump and fall on us. I don't. You're right. That drives me nuts. But you make some good points. I got a question for you related to your account and actually our show. So I find that you're similar to myself and the host of BTT and all of our listeners. We curse, we turn up our volumes between medium and maximum most of the time, but there's never any malicious intent as we discuss old school wrestling, which old school wrestling, especially the promos, they were the farthest thing from politically correct. I noticed that you get some of the same feedback we get on our show. Why do you have to curse? Stop talking so harsh, etc. Talk about how that and how it relates to sports, culture, and pro wrestling during the 80s, because I have seen, I don't think you go off on people, but I've seen you on Twitter say, I'm going to damn well please say what the hell I want. Because it's funny how people they tell you to turn it down. They don't want you to curse. And I'm like, he's not doing anything malicious. He's just using a few curse words. Chill out, people. And it resonates with me because I get the same thing feedback from people about this show.
Well, see, that's a little bit of a touchy subject for me, because I realize that that's one of the things that I'm known for is the cussing. But at the same time, I really think it's kind of overblown. I mean, I do, and I get emails, I get comments on Twitter, some of which, some of which I cut a little promo on, as
Yes.
you said, but I'll get emails too, and some of them are quite sincere. Where somebody's just, geez, could you cut down on the cursing? But it always strikes me as an odd thing to do, to tell somebody else how to conduct their business. Now, I say that as somebody that's been telling Tony Khan how to conduct his business for the last 30 minutes. So that probably makes me a hypocrite, but we're on here to talk wrestling, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
one of those things where follow me or don't follow me. You're certainly entitled to your opinion. I mean, if somebody says you cuss too much, I mean, that's fine, but they should also be prepared. If I if I have a counter opinion, right? I usually will only comment in the way that you have said if somebody is going out of their way to be rude to me.
Yeah.
If somebody just says, "Gosh, could you cut down on the cussing?" I'm not really going to say anything to that. And in fact, there have been a couple of times that people were so sincere and genuine that I actually sent them an email back and just said, "Hey, I appreciate you being a fan of the content, but this is who I am, and I tweet what I think is funny and in the way that I like to speak. And if that's not for you, then I respect that. But that's a choice that they have to make about whether or not they're going to consume the tweets or not. As far as the cussing itself, I've actually gone back. People talk about it so much sometimes that I have gone through my tweets and tried to figure out what my ratio of cussing is. And as near as I can figure, I only cuss in about 3 out of every 10 tweets, so you would, to hear some people tell it, you'd think that every tweet was just fuck fuck fuckity fuck. But I talk on Twitter the same way that I would talk to you if you and I were just having a conversation about sports or wrestling or whatever, and we weren't recording it. We were just talking as buddies. And I think that the way that I talk, probably is kind of a familiar voice in some ways to a lot of us who talk to our friends that way. And I kind of made the decision going into this, and maybe I had the advantage of not really looking at myself as a personality, or not really looking at myself as somebody who was kind of getting into the entertainment industry in a sense. I just saw myself as a guy who was tweeting stuff, and I decided early on that I was just going to use the same voice that I would use if I was talking to my best friends. And I've made a lot of friends that way, and I've had a lot of people tell me that the way that I talk and the cussing and whatever is it's kind of what they do with their buddies as well. So it kind of makes me familiar in a sense, and that's what I want. I want people to feel connected with what I'm tweeting, and I want it to feel personal. And if it sounds like I'm tweeting to you like I consider you a good friend, then good, because I do consider my followers to be my friends.
I think, Ricky, we grew up in an era that was that is much different than this era today. We grew up in an era where, we had shows, and I would actually love to have discussions with you about this. I have a minor in sociology, so I'd love to have actual
Oh,
discussion.
okay. Okay.
We grew up in an era of, Archie Bunker and the Jeffersons and the shows like that where, man, I was watching Archie Bunker with my mother-in-law a few years ago, and the look on her face was priceless. She looked at me and goes, "I used to like him. I don't like him anymore." But she's in her mid 60s, so late 60s. But we grew up in a different era, and I mentioned that because, like, my grandfather fought in World War II, and he cursed a lot around me as a kid. F word, mother, everything was you motherfucker. I mean, nonstop. That's he
I
it was
like
his
him already, by the way.
Yeah, but he wasn't a horrible human being. He didn't want to, he wasn't trying to, do harm to anyone. In my old neighborhood I grew up in, everybody. My mother had a mouth like a sailor. She didn't say the F word, but everything else was fair game. And we just you and I grew up in a different era, and things were not like they are now, where every word is parsed and everything you say is overanalyzed. And so when I read your tweets, it actually reminds me of Book in the Territory, our show, because we do curse and we are harsh towards certain things, but it's like all in fun. Example I'll give, and I can't forget your exact caption in. I think you've tweeted out like the Sears catalog with women in lingerie before. Maybe I'm just not remembering this right, but Harper, my one of my co-hosts, he made a joke one time. He's like, "Man, remember when we used to have to crank off to the Sears catalog because that's all we had?" And it's like stuff like that you say, and I mean, if you said that in a tweet, somebody's gonna be like, "What the hell's wrong with you?" No, it was like you're 12 years old, you're 13, and like that's the mindset of the 13-year-old at that time because they didn't have the internet, so they flip open to the freaking Sears catalog with the lingerie. I mean, it's not malicious. It's just haha, remember those days type thing. And you might
The
throw it.
struggle was real, is what
Yeah,
you're saying.
the
Yeah.
struggle is real. You didn't, as Harper says, you couldn't just go to Instagram and just look up your flavor of the day. It just didn't work that way back then. So, it's those type of things I think about when I think about your Twitter and how you speak on there when you're talking about whether it's you do it with everything, sports, culture, wrestling. It's all of those things. So I appreciate it, and I can relate to you in a way because I do get messages of, now you guys would have a better program if you just toned it down a little. I'm like, well, I mean, you do realize in the '80s and even early '90s, pro wrestling wasn't toned down. They did some really crazy stuff and said crazy things. That's just how it
Well,
was, and we're reliving that.
yeah, and the people that say that to you, I wonder how many people are listening to their podcast, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's I don't ever want to be the person, who plays like the big shot card or whatever, but you obviously have something successful going, and you're successful for a reason. You're obviously producing content that you have a loyal base of listeners that want to consume that. So you're doing something right. And for somebody else who's not involved in all the hard work and hours that you and your partners have put into what you do, for them to come along and say, hey, you should do it this way, it's kind of insulting. People may not intend it that way, but it's a bit insulting for someone who isn't really privy to what you're doing, especially in a successful venture, to say, hey, I've got a better idea of how you should do things than you do. That's a very condescending position to take.
yeah. I just find it I find it funny that there's certain words that just it gets under people's skin. I'm like, it is what it is. I appreciate feedback, but I can relate to you. I've seen your response to some tweets, and I know what you mean. You like you said, it's ones that are like, nasty flavored that come at you. Like you said, you've responded to people saying, hey, I mean, if it's not for you, it's not for you, and I agree. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But I've seen the people that I guess come at you kind of nasty, and you're like, I'm damn well gonna do what I damn well please. It's funny. I laugh. I think again, I love the account, so that's that. But it is good stuff. But I can definitely relate to you when it comes to that. Um, I was gonna ask you something else, and now it just slipped my mind, Ricky.
Yeah, that's what happens when you. That's the downside of getting to be the age that we are.
Oh man, tell me about it. The things slip your mind in a heartbeat. Um, I'm trying to think, man. Let me ask this: did you have any questions for me? I don't, not maybe not that I'm Mr. Big or anything, but I figured I'd throw it at you because I'm trying to think of what I had to ask.
Well, I mean, I think that I would probably be interested, in terms of how did you get started with booking the territory? I mean, where did that come for you?
So as a couple of old school wrestling fans, it started with myself and Doc Turner, my co-host for the first 6 months. It was just he and I believe. He was a world class fan with the Von Erichs and Chris Adams, Iceman King Parsons in Dallas, Texas, and he spent time at the Sportatorium. So he was a wrestling fan. He and I, as fate had it, I had started a job in the early 2010 period, not 2010, but a couple years after that. And one day he and I got to talking at work, and he made a comment about wrestling, or he said something. I can't remember what it was. And it's kind of weird when somebody tells you they're a wrestling fan, and then they're your age, so you kind of, they're not a 20-year-old. You go, oh, you're a wrestling fan, huh? Well, really? What do you watch? What did you watch back in the day? And then that kind of leads to another question and another question. So we honestly, over the years, at lunch or just different times, downtime, we would have numerous conversations that probably would have been great podcast episodes, but we were, we weren't recording. We were just having just discussions about this angle and that angle. And so that kind of got the ball rolling. And then one day, I have a friend of mine who does a New Orleans Saints podcast, and he's been doing it for over a decade. Well, I was talking to him once, and I just started thinking. I was like, "Hey, man, how hard is it to do a podcast?" I'm not a old person, but I'm not the most tech savvy. But I mean, I know how to get things up on YouTube and whatnot. But so he was like, "Oh, it's not hard. You just got to do this, this, and this." So I kind of researched it for a bit, and then I just kind of went to Doc and said, "Hey, you want to do a wrestling podcast?" I know there's, at the time we thought there was a million. There's really a million now. And he said, "Sure." So we first started talking about the current product, WWE, a little bit of Impact, which was still TNA, but it had the show Impact on, wow, what was it on? Destination America at the time. A little bit of ROH talk, but it was mainly current product centric. And then things evolved, and we just were really down on it because, we grew up in an era where it was better. We were always nostalgic, right? So then we started talking classic wrestling, and that's kind of where it took off, because downloads weren't good until the transition was made to classic wrestling, and that's when we started doing the Smoky Mountain Wrestling recaps, which is Cornette's promotion, and that's when Corny, I met him, and then he asked me on his show to talk about SMW. And that's kind of how the ball got rolling. And from there, for a couple of years, it was just, well, we did the one free show a week, and then we added and we did two free shows a week. And then we started our Patreon, which has become very successful. And from there, that's how the ball's gotten rolling. But it's been for anybody who has done a podcast that listens to this, I tell people all the time, because I have people reach out to me, that are just starting or, 6 months in, and hey, how do I get an audience? And they want this, and they want it quick. We'll be 7 years old at the end of May this year, and it's still a work in progress. It takes a lot of time and commitment. It's a lot of work. I mean, it's a part-time job, the amount of hours that I put into it personally, because I'm the one who does all the editing and uploading. My co-hosts have it easy. All they got to do is watch old wrestling and come to me and talk about it. But then I got to talk about it, and then I got to produce it and get it up on all the platforms and all that good stuff. So it can be a lot of work, but that's a brief summary. I know I went long, of the origin of how it all got started. It just happened to be two wrestling fans from the 80s, early 80s, that by fate started working together and discovered, hey, you watched it and I watched it. And then like a couple years after that, the podcast was born, and the rest is history. I got to thank Jim Cornette, though, because I feel like if he doesn't have me on his show, I don't know if we ever have an audience, because we're just a bunch of idiots talking into a microphone. So I'm thankful to Jim, because he kind of gave me a sliver of credibility, if that's possible.
Well, I think that's a beautiful story, man. I think that guys like yourself and Corny and some of the other Brian Last, some of the other podcasts that are out there, I mean, it's telling the story of this incredible era of wrestling that we enjoyed, and not only through what you do, to guys like myself get to relive it, but the younger generation gets introduced to it. And I'm sure that you guys have sent a lot of younger people on some YouTube deep dives, watching the good shit. So you're doing the Lord's work.
Yeah, we got a lot of feedback during our Smoky Mountain run when we did every episode, all 200 episodes of Cornette Smoky Mountain Wrestling. From what I was told, like there were a lot of people who found us through that because Corny promoted it. He talked about it a lot on his show, and a lot of young people, as I say that. So people who and Smoky Mountain Wrestling was early to mid '90s, so it wasn't like it was it wasn't like the '80s or anything or the late '70s, but it was an old school promotion during that time period. So we've got a lot of younger listeners who they're in their late 20s, even early 30s. It's hard. I can't believe I think of early 30s as young now, but I mean it is. You get to a point where it's like, well, that's still young because I mean if you would give me a chance to go back to 30, I'd be like, yeah, let me go back to that era. It was great. But so you're right. I think a lot of younger listeners have got onto it and they'll go back and watch the old stuff and watch the promos and watch the storytelling. So it's a lot of fun, man. I love talking about old school wrestling. I could talk a little current wrestling, but I can't talk enough of it because I don't watch it religiously like many people do. But yeah, I could talk about the old angles all day. And matter of fact, I do have to ask you, as a Memphis guy, a Lawler guy, what was your what's your favorite angle if you do have one, or maybe you've got more than one, favorite angle, maybe two or three that you're like, yeah, that's what set the hook for me, and I was hook, line, and sinker. I was a fish.
Man, the number one has got to be Andy Kaufman, and Lawler. Being that age, and again, being in a position where the line between the reality and working, was pretty easy to blur for me as a little rube of a kid growing up in Kentucky, and Andy Kaufman and the whole pile driver neck brace going on late night with David Letterman, and the King slapping him, and Kaufman, throwing the coffee in his face. That for me was sort of the pinnacle of like, oh my God, because I remember seeing the article in the newspaper of where it had happened, and it was actually being reported in the local paper, as though Jerry Lawler, put this guy in traction, and you're thinking, oh my God, is Jerry Lawler going to go to jail? What's happening here? So, I don't know how long Andy Kaufman would have, you know, done pro wrestling, or how many stints he would have had. I'm almost certain that he would have done more, if he hadn't been taken so tragically young. But he was brilliant. I mean, you want to talk about getting heat. I mean, my goodness, man, and Andy Kaufman was pushing the people's buttons like few other. And I also remember, I want to say that it was a very young Rick Rude went out into the parking lot with I feel like it was either it may have been a baseball bat. I was going to say a baseball bat or a sledgehammer or whatever, and went to town on quote unquote Jerry Lawler's car. I remember that was one that kind of made my eyes pop out of my head. We went out of the studio, which was a pretty rare thing in those days. The camera going out in the parking lot, and Rick Rude's out there, and he's wailed on Jerry Lawler's car and whatever, and that felt like a pretty big deal. Another thing, which kind of brings me back to another thing that I think is wrong with wrestling these days, and it's just, there's just way too many attacks between matches. you have what Corny calls the afterbirth, right? And you have you have these attacks, and it's so funny because the announcers, there's not even an opportunity for the announcers to sell it, because Anthony Agogo comes out and kicks the shit out of Cody and tosses the Union Jack over him, and we just throw it backstage, or we go to commercial or whatever. Like these ass kickings out of the blue have become so routine that they lose their impact. We're just moving on to the next segment because we just expect guys to get the shit beat out of them,
Yeah.
on the show. And again, the psychology of it, it does not have the impact. When that sort of thing would happen once in a while, then it was the kind of thing that got people talking and possibly, if you were lucky, moved the needle. And I think it was a big deal for me anytime that somebody would get attacked during an interview on Memphis, and you'd have Lance Russell just totally put out with it. Can say, oh, can we get Eddie Marlin out here? Somebody get Eddie Marlin. And poor Lance is, oh yeah, you're a real big man. You're a real big man when it's 3-on-1. And Lance would sell it so well. And that was the kind of thing that got people to come out, and see that big show in Memphis every week. Again, I think that the booking was done with a greater sophistication, back in those days.
Well, you said when it happens all the time, it's no longer special. It's kind of like the thing with when you've seen 20 million dives and 20 million flips on a wrestling program. It doesn't have the same.
I
If
see
you've
one
seen,
more tope suicida.
yeah,
I
exactly.
never, I never want to see another fucking tope suicida.
See,
Or at least not for 6 months. There's nothing wrong with a tope suicida, but other than Excalibur creams his pants every time he sees one. But it's all the time. I don't care what it is. I don't want to look at porn 23 and a half hours a day. I mean, every you can have too much of anything. Whatever give me all the pizza, but don't give me all the pizza, because I'm going to feel like shit after I've ate two whole ones.
yeah,
So sometimes what we leave to the imagination is important. It's like the old quote from John Wooden. Don't mistake activity for achievement. And pro wrestling today is hella active, and sometimes I think it forgets what the actual underlying point should be.
I think you're I think you're spot on with that, and that's been the gripe of mine for years with the current product. And I'm not knocking anybody who watches it. I try, like I said, I've been trying lately with AEW. It's just it's different. And I said once on one of our shows a while back, you can't pro wrestling nowadays, like when you look at it, it's just a it's just different. I talked earlier about how things evolve, and like, just look at football, the way they throw flags nowadays on what's called unnecessary roughness, or a 15-yard penalty versus what they would have never thrown that flag on. You'd have literally had to almost shoot someone on the field to get the 15-yard penalty, whereas nowadays they throw it all the time. It's different. It doesn't, I gotta respect people's opinions. That people who watch it, look, if that works for you and you like it, great, man. Whatever makes you happy, as long as you're not harming anyone in the process. I hope you enjoy it. I mean, and we've got listeners of ours. I know a bunch of them in the Facebook group that watch the current stuff. There's one guy, his last name's Javorsky, and the joke on the show all the time is he'll crank off to anything, and what that means is he literally watches AEW, Monday Night Raw, SmackDown, Impact. He does not miss wrestling any night of the week. That's all he watches, and he's a good sport about it. But it's just a different the sports entertainment, whatever you want to call it. Pro wrestling's just different nowadays. It's not the same. But if that's what you like and enjoy it, then by all means knock yourself out and watch it. But also, we know our era was better, but every generation, I guess, says that. So,
Hey, listen,
uh,
somebody's, my fear is that 30 years from now, some old guy is going to be on the future podcast or whatever we have then, talking about how these guys today, man, they can't hold a candle to Orange Cassidy.
Right.
That's probably where we're headed. So I probably shouldn't be bitching because the trajectory ain't great. So maybe I should enjoy what I'm getting a little bit more than I do. But I still enjoy tuning in to AEW, sometimes. And, I mean, if for no other reason, I love Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone. And, they sound like wrestling should sound. And, you know, um, that at least that part of it is comforting. I mean, JR is one of my favorite parts of the broadcast for sure.
Yeah, and I wanted to circle back because I missed something too. The Kaufman Lawler angle is tremendous stuff. Like watching, I've watched it back. I didn't see it when it happened, obviously, but I've watched most of it back on YouTube and all of the clips. And man, they made that was tremendous. I mean, it was you thought it was real. I mean, there was no doubt in your mind, even if you watch it today and you know the story. And I've heard Lawler talk about I think it was on Steve Austin's show years ago, like just kind of open up about the whole thing, how it, every little nook and cranny behind what went down. And you watch it, even though you know it's a work, you see it now, you're like, oh my God, that was phenomenal what they did. And Andy Kaufman was something else, the way he put that stuff over. You can't say enough great things about that Lawler Kaufman stuff. It was on YouTube, most of it at one point. I don't know if it still is, but it is tremendous. It's always a good revisit to go back and look at because they did it so well. And then you said Lance Russell, he's tremendous. Whenever he would get disgusted, oh come on, guys, he would put it
Get
over.
out, Jimmy, get out of here. He was always so put out with Jimmy Hart. Oh,
Yeah,
Jimmy, come
you
on
know
now.
when he got on Twitter years ago before he passed, he followed me, and I, I
That's now, yeah. I'm geeking out just hearing about it. I can imagine how you felt.
yeah, he followed me, and I just remember, wow, Lance Russell, and I had to click to see, oh, is it really him? And from what I know, from what I understand, it was really his Twitter, and I tweeted him and said, oh my God, I can't remember my exact words. Mr. Russell, thank you so much for the follow. I mean, I'm honored. I didn't grow up watching you in Mid South, but I'm just thinking to myself, he's the voice of Memphis, and then he did some stuff for Corny and Smoky Mountain, but he also was in WCW after
Uh-huh.
Turner took over. So he had a stint there as well. But he's Lance Russell. I mean, he's just a tremendous, one of the best, if not the best, at what he did. And he gave me a follow, and I was like, "Oh my God, Mr. Russell, you're the greatest." So I nerded out for that. That was pretty cool.
That's about as good as it gets. I mean, Lance was he was as good as anybody, and Dave Brown. I just love both of them. Dave Brown was always obsessed with the length of every match. Dave was the guy who had to tell you that Bill Dundee beat Billy Joe Travis in 4 minutes and 32 seconds. It was always very important. For those of us that are scoring at home. Although Corny might have been writing that stuff down, but I always loved that. It was a small little touch, but it just added to the fact of making you feel like you had watched a real contest.
Yeah,
And sometimes it's the little things, that go a long way. And again, if you watch, the old stuff, going back to what I was saying earlier, there's, like for instance, talking about AEW, one of the things that is really getting on my nerves is the way that Will Hobbs is being used. To me, Will Hobbs could be a superstar in this industry. His size is great. I think to be as young as he is, I think his work is really good. His facial expressions are terrific. I think he's a guy that could be a star, and to have him on TV losing to Orange Cassidy, come on. And I know that Orange Cassidy is popular and all of that, but I mean, look, If you're gonna stand Will Hobbs up next to Orange Cassidy and tell me that that little pipsqueak could beat this man in anything that is presuming itself to be a real competition, you've taken me. The clown has just gone by on the unicycle juggling bowling pins. You lose me at that point, and I wish that there was a way that I could get in Tony Khan's ear and impart a little bit of advice, not to sound cocky about it, but I mean, man, Will Hobbs is something that you should not be able to mess up, and hopefully in the long run that won't happen. But it's a little frustrating sometimes when you see talent like that is Hobbs is he reminds me of an 80s 90s era big man. And as the wrestlers, generally speaking, are smaller today in a lot of cases than they were when we were kids. You got some slight guys out there,
Yeah.
and to have a legitimate big monster with all the potential in the world. I'd like to see him utilized better, but we do see an emphasis on the high flying, and the people that again are the Lucha Brothers against the Young Bucks. You're going to see some spectacular things. I mean, Ray Phoenix. I mean, at least if you're going to be a flyer, Ray Phoenix may paralyze himself, but he does spectacular things. But you see some of the spots that he does with Nick Jackson and things like that, and it's just like, what are we really doing here? Are we just doing things because we can and we want to show off? And I think that's what it is a lot of the time.
I agree with you on Hobbs. I think he's I don't think he's like main event material right now, but he's a guy that you look at and you're like, that guy, there's something there, and you feel like it could he could be something big one day. Now, obviously, things have to fall in place, but there is something there, and I've liked him for a
Yeah,
while. There's something there,
don't
though.
embarrass him on TV. Don't embarrass him on national TV at a
Yeah,
minimum.
yeah,
I agree with you. He's not there yet, but you got something.
yeah.
And
You got
one
something.
one one way you can help yourself is not having him, lose to a guy who weighs 150 pounds and runs around with his hands in his pockets. It
That's right.
seems like a simple thing, but maybe it's
Yeah.
not.
No, you're right. That's the thing. It's like, wow, you got somebody like this, and you're gonna tear him down by having him lose to 150-pound person. I could not agree with you more. You're spot on with it, Ricky. Spot on with it. Ricky, as we wind things down, before we get out of here, I want to give you an opportunity to, I've mentioned the Twitter at Super 70 Sports. I know you've also got like I guess a link where you sell shirts and whatnot. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to plug anything you'd like to plug while we're still here.
All right. Well, one of my favorite portions of the podcast. So, yeah, I would encourage people to check out Super 70 Sports Store .com. I mean, if you don't follow the Twitter account, I got to say Mike's done a pretty good job of making it sound good. So hopefully you're curious enough to give me a follow, but also check out Super 70 Sports Store.com. We've got a lot of retro throwback uh, t-shirts, based on sports, based on pop culture, based on TV and movies and things like that. And we also got some wrestling shirts in there. You're gonna find stuff like the Greg Valentine "I broke Wahoo's leg" shirt, and Piper pays back, and Dusty sucks eggs, and some of these great shirts that guys wore back in the 80s. That looked like they had just gone down to the local screen printer, and had it made. I got to give MJF credit. When he beat Cody and he went on TV wearing the "I pinned Cody" shirt. I had to applaud him because it was really a throwback to the days when, guys would come out. Ole Anderson comes out wearing the "Damn I'm Good" shirt, that kind of stuff. So, if you like that kind of old school wrestling attitude, you just might find a shirt in the store that you're going to want to wear.
Yeah, it's good. I've been on your store. I mean, there's a ton. It's not like one or two. I mean, you've got tons of shirts, so lots of stuff to choose from. I mean, whether you're a wrestling fan, sports fan, or whatever, you've got a ton of things. And I would advise anyone go check it out. Just go see what he's got up there because it's just tremendous. And it's super70sportsstore.com, right, Ricky?
Yeah, that's right. And I always tell people, hey, like I can, you may not want to buy anything, but I definitely, if you take a good look through the store, I might not be able to get your money, but I definitely will tempt you at a minimum because I'm pretty proud of it. Like you said, we've probably got somewhere in the range of about 800 different shirts in the store now. So there really is something in there for everybody, and it's stuff for the most part that that it's hard to find other places. Some of the shirts that I always would have liked to have worn, but I couldn't find it. Being in this position of having my own business, I've been able to actually make some shirts, that I'd like to wear, and I think that your listeners, probably will find some that they like too.
I agree. When you go to the store, you'll find it. You won't spend hours. I'm exaggerating, but you will spend quite some time flipping through all of the different shirts and memorabilia, not memorabilia, but just the shirts that he has on the store. There's tons of stuff. Literally, whether it's wrestling, sports, it's really really good stuff. And I again, I agree with you. You will be very tempted when you're going through the store. When you're going through the store, Ricky, did we miss anything that you wanted to discuss today? Please let me know because I don't want to miss anything. I've had a great time talking to you and whatnot.
I
But yeah,
I got to tell you, Mike, I feel like I'm not Catholic, but I feel like I just went to confession. This was cathartic.
uh,
I got all my opinions out of my system here about modern wrestling, and I got to talk about a lot of my old school favorites. So I have to tell you, man, I have interviewed hundreds of people, and I've been interviewed dozens of times myself. But I got to tell you, this is probably one of my favorite conversations I've ever had.
I cannot believe as popular as your Twitter is and you've become that of all the tons, I'm sorry, millions of wrestling podcasts that are out there that you have I mean I believe it, but it boggles my mind that you had no one has I don't want to say no one's asked you, but that you had not been on a wrestling podcast before. So I'm honored and I am blessed and very happy to talk to you because and I'm glad you had a great time because if you're willing to, we definitely should do it again sometime. You come back on and give even more opinions about whether it's AEW or old school wrestling. Yeah, most definitely because I've had a great time. But again, I'm almost dumbfounded. I'm like I can't believe he's not done a wrestling podcast before. So I'm
Yeah, it
honored.
is. Yeah, well, I'm honored that you asked me. And yeah, it really is kind of a strange thing because, one of the questions that I do get frequently is, when a big name person follows you, is that exciting? And, what is it, when a big time celebrity follows you, what's that like? Kind of like we're talking about Lance Russell, right? It's a thrill when somebody that you think highly of and that you're a fan of follows you. And I got to tell you, for me, I really think it's pro wrestlers that I still mark out for pro wrestlers. It's like I could be followed by famous athletes or TV show hosts or whatever. But when I look and see that, I've been followed by, Jeff Jarrett or Glenn Jacobs or any of those guys, John Layfield. When I see those guys interacting with me and following me, it always is just a little bit more fun because there's just something about pro wrestling for me that always has, and even today, it's just a breed apart. For those of us that get it, and for those of us that love it, there's just something about pro wrestling that puts it in its own category, I think, away from everything else. And that's something that I felt when I was 10 years old, and sitting here tonight chatting with you at 50, I still feel that way. Pro wrestling is, in my opinion, truly, it is one of the great art forms of modern times, and I have a tremendous amount of respect. My criticism about booking and the way a lot of modern wrestling is, I have tremendous respect for those guys and women, who get in the ring and give up their bodies to one another and trust one another and go out there to entertain us. I think it's a hell of a thing, and I always hold those folks in high regard.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's a wonderful sport, a wonderful business. Look, we grew up on it, right? We grew up on the absurdity of it all. It's just tremendous stuff. And again, I'm glad you were here to have this conversation with me, and we definitely have to do it again. So again, I want to mention again, Ricky's Twitter is at Super70 Sports. If you're not following it, please go follow it. His tweets are tremendous. You are bound to see a wrestling tweet come up from a time or two, along with sports and culture and whatnot. It is just tremendous. And check out his store as well, Super70 Sports Store, and just go browse. And like he said, you will be tempted. But Ricky, hang tight. I'm gonna stop this recorder. But I appreciate your time again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.